All right, today we're diving into a pretty provocative thesis from the author Miles Mathis. His argument that the foundations of 20th century physics weren't some grand scientific revolution, but actually a deliberate, calculated intellectual revolt, one driven by a pretty surprising hidden motive. So, to really get what he's saying, we have to start with this classic 20th century idea summed up perfectly here by Bertrand Russell. The thinking was that our deep-seated need to find order and make sense of the universe, well, it's really just born out of a fear of the unknown. This was a really foundational idea for modern thought.
But the author we're looking at, he just flips this completely on its head. He says the exact opposite is true. It's the denial that the world can be understood, the denial that it's intelligible, that is what's actually born of fear. And you know what? This one single idea is the key to his entire argument.
Okay, so let's dive in. Here's our roadmap. First, we'll unpack the philosophical fear that the author claims was pulling all the strings. Then, we'll see how he argues this fear led physics to, completely abandon reason. After that, we'll look at the alleged strategy behind it all. And finally, we'll get to the really controversial accusations he levels against the key figures themselves. So, let's tackle that first big idea, a fear of greatness. The author's central claim is that the big intellectual movements of the 20th century were, at their very core, a refusal to compete, a refusal to even try to measure up to the unbelievable achievements of the giants who came before them. And he doesn't frame this as some sort of natural evolution of ideas. Oh no, in his view, it was a deliberate inversion of values. By swapping out things like determinism for uncertainty and clarity for paradox, he argues the new intellectuals created a whole new game, one where they could never be compared to and found lacking against the absolute masters of the past. And he actually grounds this whole psychological diagnosis in Nietzsche's concept of ressentiment. He suggests that this new intellectual class was fueled by a deep-seated resentment, not of kings or governments, but of the sheer greatness of people like Newton and Leonardo. Geniuses whose achievements just made them feel inadequate. This metaphor of the spider is just perfect for his argument. He claims the goal wasn't just progress, it was subversion. It was an attempt by what he calls weak intellectuals to tear down the very idea of greatness itself, to dismantle the standards they felt they could never, ever meet. Okay, so let's see how this all connects. The author takes this whole philosophical framework and applies it like a lens directly to the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, the theory spearheaded by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg. His argument is that the Copenhagen interpretation is almost entirely defined by what it is not. See, it's not describing an objective reality, it's not about classical particles or waves, it's not mechanical. For the author, this isn't a physical theory at all. It's just a collection of denials. He actually calls it empty speech. And this famous quote from Niels Bohr, for the author, this is Exhibit A. He sees this as a deliberate move to unhitch physics from its traditional job, which is, finding out how nature actually is and redefining it as just being about what we can talk about. He points to the quantum leap as a perfect example. This idea that an electron can jump between orbits without ever passing through the space in between. He claims there was zero data for this, that it was a purely philosophical, almost irrational idea just dropped into physics to make it seem more strange and paradoxical. This comparison really gets to the heart of his critique, doesn't it? He's arguing that the entire goal of science was fundamentally changed. It shifted from a project of discovery to, a project of conversation. And in doing that, it dramatically lowered the bar for what could be called a successful theory. So you might be wondering, was this change just an accident, a natural progression? Well, according to this author, absolutely not. He claims it was a deliberate strategy to win a game that the new physicists felt they just couldn't win playing by the old rules. He lays out this alleged three-step strategy. Step 1, you lower the bar, make physics all about uncertainty and illogic. Step 2, you just flush the old rules and embrace paradox. And step 3, and this is the real kicker, you forbid any future competition by just declaring your theory is complete, the final word, end of story. This leads the author to ask a pretty simple question, challenging this whole idea of completeness. I mean, since when is science not open to being revised? And right on the heels of that, he asks this, implying that the motives here were actually anti-scientific, that the goal was to close the book on physics just to protect their own legacy from anyone who might come along later. And this is where things get
Well, really personal and incredibly controversial. The author shifts from analyzing the ideas to analyzing the men behind the ideas.
Yeah, he basically asks, okay, let's set the ideas aside for a second. What about the men themselves? And here he focuses his critique squarely on Werner Heisenberg, one of the main architects of the Copenhagen interpretation.
The author lays out a really stark accusation here. He claims that documents that came out in 2002 from Niels Bohr's archive prove, in his words, unequivocally, that Heisenberg was actively working to build an atomic bomb for the Nazis. And he alleges that this history has been deliberately whitewashed ever since to protect the reputation of modern physics. And he doesn't stop there. He adds another layer, claiming Heisenberg didn't even know what matrix math was when he supposedly invented matrix mechanics. He alleges that it was others, like Max Born, who bolted on the math later, meaning Heisenberg is famous for something he didn't even do. And to back this all up, he points out that even the titans of the old guard were, well, less than impressed. He cites Max Planck, one of the fathers of quantum theory, who reportedly called Heisenberg's matrix mechanics disgusting. So, after all is said and done, what's the lasting legacy here, according to the author? Well, it's a fuzzier physics, a field that he claims now celebrates all this stuff, paradoxes, inconsistency, virtual events, over the tough, rigorous mechanical explanations of the past. All right, so let's tie this all together. What's the author's final takeaway? In his view, physics was literally redefined to be that which they could do, to fit the limited abilities of its new leaders. It was a way to cover up what he claims were their own weaknesses, like poor visualization skills. The goal, he says, shifted from a search for truth to just winning prizes and getting promotions, all of it driven by a fundamental refusal to compete with the giants of the past. And so, this whole deep dive into a really critical perspective leaves us with one final big question that kind of gets to the heart of this entire critique. How much should our knowledge of a scientist's character or their alleged motivations really affect how we view the science they created?